tragically lost in Colorado yesterday by yet another senseless mass shooting in our country. My heart breaks for their families. But the sobering and harsh reality is that in many parts of the United States, it is easier to buy a gun than it is to cast a ballot. In 25 states, voters must be registered and have specific forms of identification in order to cast a ballot. But those same states allow people to buy rifles without permits and require no background checks for some sales. Think about that. It seems to me that we have our priorities entirely backward when it comes to, or when we make it easier to buy a weapon than we do to cast a ballot. Madam President, as we work to rebuild our economy for all people, we must acknowledge that to build an inclusive economy, we need an inclusive democracy. Just as the pandemic has put a spotlight on the inequities in our economy and our healthcare systems, so too has the pandemic put a spotlight on the inequities in access to the ballot. The 2020 election, held in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, demonstrated once again that we have made it easier for some citizens to vote than others. This is not an accident. Depending on where a voter lives, they may or may not have the ability to register to vote online. They may or may not be able to participate in same-day registration. They may or may not be able to vote early or vote by mail. All this varies state by state. This patchwork has a direct and dramatic effect on whose voices are heard in our democracy. And too often, it's working class communities, communities of color, young people whose voices are silenced. For voters whose work schedule does not allow them to wait in line to vote, the denial of vote by mail or early voting denies the opportunity to vote altogether. For voters who do not have that specified form of state identification, even though they're American citizens of voting age and otherwise eligible to vote, lack of an ID can mean that they will not be given a ballot, even if they can verify their identity some other way. For voters who want to vote by mail and may have access to some form of vote by mail, unreasonable ballot receipt deadlines, a scarcity of ballot return locations, and or slow, unreliable postal service delivery can mean that their ballots won't be counted. For young voters and for those who move frequently, antiquated registration systems and unreasonably early registration deadlines can leave them unable to register to vote or to update their registration record in time to exercise their fundamental right to vote. All of these voting restrictions have a disproportionate impact on communities of color. Just like the poll taxes and literacy tests of the Jim Crow era, the truth is plain for all to see. Voter suppression laws are rooted in white supremacy. The For the People Act presents an opportunity for us to establish a baseline of voting rights and ballot access for all voters. Now, I know that the For the People Act will improve voting rights in America because as California's Secretary of State, I helped adopt and implement these best practices. These include automatic and same-day voter registration, online voter registration, expanded access to vote by mail, extended early voting periods, in-person early voting periods, and widespread convenient access to secure, official ballot drop-off locations. Together, these policies help ensure equitable access to the ballot, and in so doing, strengthen our democracy. While California has led the way in making our elections more accessible to all voters, the policies we implemented are not unique to our state. States like Maine and Alaska have also adopted automatic voter registration policies. States like Utah, Iowa, Idaho, and Wyoming also permit same-day voter registration. States like Florida and Ohio allow no-excuse vote by mail and provide voters with early voting options as well. The election reforms within the For the People Act are not partisan. These reforms are not Democrat or Republican. They're common sense, and they're proven to work. All voters deserve equal voting rights and equal access to the ballot. Colleagues, we are a stronger democracy and a better nation when we hear all voices from all corners of our nation, and when those voices are not just heard, but they are counted. By passing the For the People Act, we can assure that more voices are heard and more voices are indeed counted. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. President.